blazing hearts. The firehouse was quieter than usual the next morning. The faint smell of charred food still lingered in the air, but it was quickly overshadowed by the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of contentment that filled the room. Wells awoke early, the soft glow of dawn filtering through the windows, casting a gentle light across the bed where Mr. Saunders, Jacob, lay peacefully asleep beside him. His chest rose and fell rhythmically, and Wells couldn't help but smile as he watched him. The night had been more than Wells could have ever dreamed. It wasn't just the passion they had shared, but the connection that had grown between them in just a few short hours. For the first time in a long time, Wells felt like he wasn't alone. There was someone who saw him for more than just the strong, heroic firefighter. Jacob had seen the man behind the uniform, and that scared and excited him in equal measure. Careful not to wake him, Wells slipped out of bed, grabbing his sweatpants from the floor before heading toward the kitchen. He could still feel the warmth of Jacob's body against his as he made his way down the hall, and a part of him wanted to crawl back under the covers, but he knew they'd need to refuel after last night's activities. He started on breakfast: eggs, bacon, and pancakes. Simple, but enough to give them both the energy they'd need for whatever the day had in store. Just as he was flipping the last of the pancakes, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Turning around, he found Jacob leaning against the doorway, hair tousled, wearing nothing but the bedsheet he had wrapped around his waist. "Good morning, Chef," Jacob greeted, his voice still husky from sleep, a lazy smile spreading across his face. "I didn't know firefighters could cook this well." Wells chuckled, feeling his heart skip at the sight of him. "We've got to eat too. And after last night, I thought you could use a decent breakfast." Jacob crossed the room, his bare feet padding softly against the floor, and came to stand beside Wells. "Last night was incredible," he said quietly, his eyes softening as he looked up at Wells. "You really are something else." Wells felt a warmth spread through his chest, one he hadn't felt in a long time. He placed the spatula down and turned to Jacob, his hands finding their way to the other man's hips as he pulled him closer. "I could say the same about you, Jacob." For a moment they stood there, wrapped in the peaceful silence of the morning, content in the closeness they had found. The fire that had raged between them last night still flickered, but now it was a slow, steady burn, comforting and full of promise. Just as Wells was about to lean in for a kiss, his phone buzzed on the counter. He groaned, reluctantly letting go of Jacob and grabbing the phone. It was a message from Keith. "Hey, hope the date went well. We've got a meeting at 10, so don't be late." Smirking face. Wells laughed, shaking his head. Keith never missed an opportunity to tease him, but it was all in good fun. He quickly typed back a reply before setting the phone aside. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Wells nodded. "Yeah, just my buddy Keith reminding me about a meeting later this morning. You know, firefighter stuff." Jacob smiled, but there was a hint of hesitation in his eyes. "I don't want to keep you from your duties." Wells caught the subtle shift in his tone and quickly stepped forward, wrapping his arms around Jacob's waist again. "You're not keeping me from anything," he reassured him. "We've got time. And besides, I'm the captain. I can afford to be a little late." Jacob relaxed into Wells' embrace, his head resting against his chest. "You're really something, Wells. I'm not used to this, someone who's so steady, so sure of himself." Wells brushed his fingers through Jacob's messy hair, tilting his chin up to meet his gaze. "I don't know if I'm always sure of myself, but I do know one thing. I'm sure about you." Jacob's eyes softened, and for the first time, Wells saw a vulnerability in him that matched his own. It was as if they were two halves of the same coin, each searching for the same thing, someone who could see them for who they truly were. They spent the rest of the morning in each other's company, enjoying breakfast, trading stories about their lives, and laughing about the awkwardness of their first encounter. Jacob shared more about his passion for teaching, how he loved shaping young minds, and Wells opened up about the challenges of leading the firehouse, the pressure of being responsible for his crew, and the weight of the job. By the time Wells had to leave for his meeting, he felt lighter than he had in years. It wasn't just the great night they'd shared. It was the understanding that they had found in each other, a sense of belonging that neither of them had expected. Before he left, Wells pulled Jacob close one last time, kissing him softly. "I'll see you soon," he promised, his voice low and sincere. Jacob smiled against his lips. "I'm holding you to that, Captain Wells." Back at the firehouse, Wells couldn't wipe the grin off his face. His fellow firefighters immediately noticed the change in him, especially Keith, who was waiting for him in the station's lounge with a smug expression. "So," Keith started, leaning against the pool table with his arms crossed. "How was your night?" Wells smirked, throwing his jacket onto the couch as he grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. "Let's just say, I owe you one for pushing me to go." Keith raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "I knew it. You finally asked him out, didn't you? And it went well." "Yeah, it went really well," Wells admitted, taking a sip of his water. "Better than I expected, actually." Keith laughed, giving Wells a playful punch on the arm. "Good for you, man. I'm happy for you. You deserve this." Wells couldn't help but agree. For the first time in a long time, he felt like things were falling into place. As he sat down with his crew to start the meeting, his mind kept drifting back to Jacob, how easily they had clicked, how natural it felt to be with him. The meeting was short, just a regular debrief on the week's upcoming drills and operations, but Wells's thoughts were elsewhere. As soon as it was over, Keith nudged him, flashing a knowing grin. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" Wells laughed. "Yeah, I can't help it." Keith gave him a supportive pat on the back. "You've got it bad, man. But hey, that's a good thing." As the day progressed, Wells couldn't wait to see Jacob again. The firehouse was busy with drills and the usual hustle of maintaining equipment, but even amidst the noise and activity, his mind kept wandering back to the night they had shared, and the promise of what was to come. That evening, as Wells drove home, his phone buzzed with a message from Jacob. "Still thinking about last night. Can't wait to see you again. Dinner at my place next time? Hongxin." Wells smiled, his heart racing with excitement. He quickly typed back, "Count me in. I'll bring the wine this time." As he drove through the streets of Kansas City, the lights of the city twinkling around him, Wells felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. His heart was no longer on fire with the uncertainty and loneliness that had plagued him for years. Instead, it was ablaze with the warmth of something new, something real. And as he looked ahead, he knew that this was just the beginning of something incredible. He was ready for whatever came next, with Jacob by his side. Wells couldn't shake the excitement building inside him. Dinner at Jacob's place? It felt like the natural next step, but also a little daunting. He hadn't been this wrapped up in someone for a long time, and the rapid pace of their connection was thrilling and terrifying all at once. The next few days at the firehouse passed in a blur of drills, calls, and camaraderie with his crew. But in the quieter moments, his thoughts always circled back to Jacob. His easy smile, the way he had fit so effortlessly into his arms, the conversations they shared that somehow felt deeper than the time they had known each other should allow. Friday rolled around, and as Wells stood in front of his closet, picking out something to wear for dinner at Jacob's, he found himself unusually nervous. He was used to being in control, whether at the firehouse or in his personal life, but with Jacob, things felt different. It was like standing on the edge of something unknown, exhilarating but uncertain. He finally settled on a pair of dark jeans and a button-down shirt, nothing too formal but still a step up from his usual work attire. Grabbing a bottle of red wine he'd picked up earlier in the day, he headed out the door, feeling a flutter of excitement mixed with anticipation. Jacob's apartment was in a charming old building on the outskirts of downtown, the kind of place with character, exposed brick, tall windows, and a view of the city skyline that stretched out in the distance. When Wells arrived, he took a deep breath before knocking on the door, trying to shake off the nervous energy swirling inside him. The door opened and there was Jacob, smiling warmly, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans that somehow made him look effortlessly attractive. "Hey," Jacob greeted, his eyes lighting up as he saw Wells. "Come in. I hope you're hungry." Wells grinned, stepping inside. "Starving, actually. And I brought wine, so I hope that's a good start." Jacob took the bottle with a smile, his fingers brushing Wells's as he did. "Perfect. I'm making pasta, so this will go great with it." The apartment was cozy, filled with books, art prints, and a few personal touches that gave Wells a glimpse into Jacob's life. There was a warmth to the space that matched the man who lived in it. Unpretentious, inviting, and full of heart. As Jacob moved around the kitchen, stirring the sauce and checking the pasta, they fell into easy conversation. Wells found himself opening up even more than he had before, sharing stories about the firehouse, his crew, and the challenges of balancing leadership with his personal life. Jacob, in turn, shared more about his teaching career, his love for his students, and the struggles of trying to make a difference in a system that often felt broken. It wasn't just the food or the wine that made the evening perfect. It was the sense of connection, the feeling that they were both finding something they had been missing. As they sat down to eat, Wells couldn't help but notice how natural it all felt, like this was where he was meant to be. "So," Jacob said, swirling his wine glass after dinner, "tell me something you haven't told anyone else." Wells raised an eyebrow, smirking playfully. "Anyone else? That's a tall order." Jacob leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I'm serious. I want to know something real. Something only you know." Wells took a moment to think, the weight of the question settling over him. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, especially not with someone he hadn't known for long. But with Jacob it felt right. "All right," Wells began, setting his glass down. "I don't tell many people this, but there are nights when I wonder if I made the right choice. Being a firefighter, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love what I do, but sometimes the weight of it, the responsibility, the loss, it gets heavy. There are times when I lie awake thinking about the people we couldn't save, and it makes me question everything." Jacob's expression softened, and he reached across the table, taking Wells's hand in his. "That's a lot to carry, but you do it because you care. That's what makes you who you are." Wells looked down at their hands, feeling a surge of emotion that caught him off guard. He hadn't expected Jacob's words to hit him so deeply, but they did. In that moment he realized just how much he needed someone like Jacob in his life. Someone who saw him, really saw him, and understood the weight of what he carried. "I'm glad you're here," Wells said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. Jacob squeezed his hand gently. "I'm glad you're here too." They sat like that for a while, the city lights twinkling outside the window, the quiet intimacy between them growing stronger with each passing moment. There was no need for words, just the warmth of their connection, the unspoken promise of something more. As the night drew to a close, Wells found himself reluctant to leave. But as they stood at the door saying their goodbyes, Jacob leaned in, kissing him softly, lingering just long enough to make Wells want more. "Stay," Jacob whispered against his lips, his voice low and full of want. Wells smiled, pulling him closer. "I thought you'd never ask." And just like that, the fire that had sparked between them grew into something deeper, something undeniable. It wasn't just the physical pull. They had found something real, something worth holding on to. As they fell into each other's arms, the world outside faded away, leaving just the two of them in the quiet stillness of the night. blazing hearts, ready to face whatever came next together.